Google Nest, the Google Nest cameras. If you've watched the channel, you know they're some of my favorite Wi-Fi cameras. Well, after installing, especially these new ones for a couple months, I have a couple gripes with Google Nest, a couple problems that they need to fix. And today we're going to talk about them. Let's get started. What up, everybody? It's George Langenbeer with Silver Hammer Surveillance. Here on the channel, we talk tech and we talk security, and today we're kind of talking about both. We're talking about Google Nest cameras, some of my favorite Wi-Fi cameras. You know, a couple months ago, they came out with the new indoor-outdoor battery cam and the new video doorbell. And we've had a couple months to install them. And I'm going to kind of talk about some of our experiences with that and some of the problems I have. I still love the cameras. I still think they're my favorite. But we've come into some situations that we'd like you to know about so you don't fall into the same trap. So we're going to kind of give you a pro tip, so to speak. And I'm going to just kind of talk about these problems in general. All right. So the new cameras have the indoor-outdoor battery camera, the new battery doorbell, and then they got a floodlight camera and a wired indoor camera. But they are also still marketing their old Nest Hello doorbell as the Nest wired doorbell. And these cameras basically replace the old Nest IQs. This is the indoor IQ. There's also an outdoor IQ. Some of my favorite cameras on the planet. All right, so the problem comes in, and a lot of you that have installed these have mentioned on the channel that you have the same problem, is the situation that I can't believe Google released these without having this figured out, but it's the fact that some of these are in the old Nest app and some of these are in the Google Home app. And why is that a problem? Well, number one, it's a problem. I just can't believe they released it that way. You basically can do all the functionality for the old IQs and the Nest doorbell in the Google Home app, except search your footage. So you can see them live and you got a little control of some settings, but you can't go back and see what happened in the past. All right, well, all the new Nest cameras are in the Google Home app only. So you see them live, you review your footage. But what that means is, especially since this camera is still being marketed as a viable camera, is we're installing these for people and we've got to tell them they've got to have two apps. So that's my problem number one. Why do we still have two apps? When they released these cameras, they should have it figured out to where these cameras were just solely in the Google Home app, whether it was live or the past. And even these IQs, they should have figured it out. Like I said, you can see these live in the Google Home app, but you can't review footage. So if you've got a combination of these, especially since they're still marketing this, you've got two different apps to search your footage. If you got one of these, the new indoor-outdoor battery camera or the battery doorbell, you're doing everything in the Google Home app. If you got one of these, you're looking in the Nest app for your past footage and Nest or Google Home for your live footage. That's just not right. I mean, I can't believe when they released these, and if you watch the channel, you know how long I was waiting for this new release. I just can't believe they released these like this. Google should have figured out a way to have it all in the Google Home app, because unfortunately, and I'm with you, I think the Nest app is eventually going away, but it should have gone away upon this release. So that's the problem in general, is the fact that we got Nest and we've got Google Home and we're using two different apps. So it's embarrassing when I'm going to install these and I got to tell somebody they got to have one app just for their doorbell. Because nowadays there's still people that want this wired doorbell, because this is the only way you're going to get the Nest Aware, which is 24/7 storage. You can do the battery camera, but it's only going to be event storage. So if you want the 24/7 storage, you got to go on the Nest app to see it. And all the rest of the stuff is going to be on the Google Home app, and that's kind of ridiculous. All right. So that being said, that's problem number one. It's just two apps in general. Okay, so problem number one leads me to problem number two, is when you're installing these. And as a person that installs these every day, we've run into this a lot, and this is where the pro tip comes in. So I'm going to kind of help you avoid some of the mistakes that we made when these first came out, because we didn't know any better. And actually, talking to Nest, they didn't even know better until we brought it to their attention. So basically, when you install a Nest camera, a cool feature of these is when you're installing multiple, you go through the setup process, and go back and check out our video on the setup of these. So I'm not going to bore you with the setup process again, but go back and check out that video and you'll kind of see how these are set up. But when you set up Nest cameras and you've got multiple cameras, once you've set up the first one, when you go for the process of the second or third or whatever it is, they connect to each other. They form a network. And that's kind of cool, because other Wi-Fi cameras, you kind of got to go in and put your Wi-Fi information and your Wi-Fi password in each time. And that can be kind of time intensive. So they kind of figured it out to where you set up one of these cameras, the second one and the third one and the fourth one connects to the first one, and so on and so forth. Well, the problem is when you install several of these, you don't know which camera it's trying to connect to. So pro tip number one is definitely install all of these in the same location near the router. So find a power outlet and set these up inside, all next to each other. Because then they connect to each other, no problem. Where you run into problems is when you go and set up these cameras. Let's say you set up one of them and you go install it outside. You set up a second one, go install it outside. Well, the third and fourth one are going to try to connect to those, and if you're too far away from them, they're not going to connect, and it's going to take you forever. So that's tip number one. Make sure that you set these up next to each other. That leads me to this doorbell. Now, in the past, the Nest IQs and the doorbells did connect to each other, just like I was talking about. But basically, if they're close enough together, you could kind of install the doorbell at any point in the install. But now we find to make sure that you install this doorbell first, because that's going to be somewhere, most of the time it's going to be somewhere centrally located near your router. And then when these other cameras try to connect to something, they're going to connect to this doorbell. So either put this out on the front door and install it first, or use a micro USB cord, plug this into a power brick, just use a regular phone charger, a micro USB cord, and plug this in right next to these cameras and set them all up together right next to each other. Because that way, when they're trying to connect to each other, it's not an issue. But this is especially an issue if you don't do what I just said. And let's say you've installed 5 of these on the house. You did install all these clustered together when you set them up, but you forgot about the doorbell and you go to do this last. This is going to have a really hard time trying to find these to go through that setup process. And not only that, you're going to be in the Nest app where these are in the Google Home app. So it's just a confusing process. So pro tip, set this up, use a micro USB cord with a power brick, plug it into a power outlet, set it up right next to your Nest cameras, whether you're doing the old ones or the new ones. These aren't really even available anymore. This still is because they're still marketing it. But set it up right next to your cameras or set this up first. Because, like I said, normally this is somewhere centrally located. So when you got these somewhere in the house to set them up, they're going to connect to this. But, we just had an install where we installed, I think, 9 of these cameras. I was all prepared, and we set these up next to each other in the house by the router and got them all set up, and then we went out to install them. But then, I was just thinking that as an afterthought, we'll just do the doorbell at the end, no big deal. It's the only camera in the Nest app. It'll connect, no problem. This was the first install that we had with a combination of both of these. Well, this started to try to connect to these cameras, and we had so many out there, we couldn't figure out which one it was trying to connect to. So we would have had to get all the cameras down and put them all right back next to the doorbell to set those up. And after they were installed, that would have been a big pain in the butt. So if you just put these next to each other, somewhere near the router to install them in the get-go, that's it. That solves that problem. But my gripe to Google is I think they should give you an option to where if this can't connect to each other, you can go ahead and manually put in your Wi-Fi information. So, basically you scan the camera, scan the QR code, you connect it to your Wi-Fi, you go through some setup process. Again, go back and watch our video on that. But, instead of just having them try to connect to each other, which can be a benefit, just give us the option of individually putting in our Wi-Fi information for each camera in case they can't find each other. Or tell us which camera it's trying to connect to. So hopefully that makes sense. But yes, please Google. Just figure that out. Number one, let's get everything in the same app. I mean, it's ridiculous nowadays that we got 2 different apps. And like I said, it's embarrassing to go into an install and have a bunch of these and say, oh, by the way, you want this wired doorbell because you want your 24/7 footage. But guess what? We got to give you a second app. Nobody wants a second app nowadays. I call it a first world problem, but nobody wants a second app. So Google, let's figure that out. Let's get everything in the Google Home app where we can review our footage, whether we're using these old beautiful Nest IQs or the new doorbell. And by the way, it does sound like there's a replacement for this coming in 2022. And I bet you anything that doorbell is completely set up through the Google Home app. Or at least let's hope so. But anyway, just to give you a pro tip, yeah, it sucks that you got to deal with 2 different apps if you're doing this doorbell, but set them up next to each other, set them up near the router, and get this bad boy in the group, even though it's in a separate app, before you go out and put them up. All right, that's it. That's my little gripe on Google Nest. Otherwise, I love these bad boys. I still do. 1080p, 4K, doesn't matter. I still love them. I still love the 24/7 footage. I mean, they're one of the only cameras like that. That's a very important feature. You don't miss anything that way. No matter what, you're going to have the footage stored. There's just so much I still love about them. And I like the Google Home app. I know there's a lot of people out there that don't. I would give the edge to the Nest app. I can agree with people on that. But I don't mind the Google Home app as much as other people do. But come on, we got to live. Change is happening. We got to move on with our lives. It's all going to Google Home. But let's put it all there. Google, please. All right, that's it. That's my little gripe session. Otherwise, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Smash the like button if you did. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the little bell notification so you get notified of future videos. Happy holidays to everybody. Hope you had a good one. And until the next video, peace and love.